Very excited that you have decided to join us this afternoon to talk about generational trends in philanthropy. My name is Brian Abernathy. I'm the general manager with Convergent. We are a national consulting firm headquartered in Atlanta, but we work with nonprofits of all types all across the country. And we primarily manage multi-million dollar complex campaigns, so capital comprehensive campaigns. We also provide some other areas of development, strategy, and fundraising consulting. And this topic is one that I have really grown to love over about the past 4 years. This idea of generational differences, generational decision making has been one of those things that nonprofits have been paying a lot of attention to because the world is paying a lot of attention to it. I was first asked to present on this in 2022, and my first response was, I don't know that I'm an expert on this. Gen Z are not the primary funders of capital campaigns, which is the primary area of fundraising consulting that Convergent is involved in. But I was really intrigued by the topic and started to dive in to some data that really showed some fascinating trends here. And I think understanding and addressing these generational trends for each individual nonprofit, their funding constituency, and what it looks like can be a make or break dynamic around sustainability for nonprofits. So we're going to have the Q&A open during the presentation today as I'm talking through this data and some of what it means for nonprofits, how it impacts fundraising. Please drop questions in. We will discuss those at the end of the webinar. And before we jump in, there's some data points, a lot of data points, and I want to just share where a lot of those came from because there's nothing new or special or proprietary about the data that I'm going to be sharing. All right. Giving USA has released a number of great reports on this. Generational trend or generations in giving was one last year. They actually had a special addendum to that came out last year as well. Just a couple of weeks ago, they released a report on donor motivators, donor decision making. So very excited to see that they're continuing to address this. And let's see, I saw that comment of feedback. Let me see here real quick. All right, turn on the noise removal there. Thank you, Kim, for letting me know about that. Hopefully that will that little change will address that. Um, as I was saying, several Giving USA reports, Classy.org several years ago released a report called Why America Gives. There are a lot of great data sources and more analytical reports out there that frankly you don't need me or Convergent or a consultant for. They're online. You could go to Gemini or Chat GPT and get some great data points. So we're going to talk about the data points, and I wanted to give credit to those sources because they deserve the recognition for all they've done to pull this information together. I think what really matters most in this discussion is how the data shapes strategy. And in that lane, shaping strategy has got to be organizational specific. Deciding how to shape communication strategy for a small market YMCA that has a very high engagement of retirees who are staying healthy in their silver sneaker years is totally different than a mid-market community college who might want to engage alum, right? It's totally different than a metro area boys and girls club who has a very different dynamic around the audience that they're trying to engage from a fundraising constituency and then the community that they're serving. So all of these data points should shape the way we think about who it is that we are each engaging in the nonprofit that we are working in. So my hope is that some of the frame of reference that I'll share today will help you ask some new questions about your donor and constituent base and inform some new strategies that you can try and see what type of results and change in outcome you can see in your fundraising. So I would love just real quick in the chat, if anybody has got a key thing that they came to this call hoping to get an answer for, if there's a big big issue of how do we address X, right? If there's a specific dynamic, and I shouldn't say X, that could be construed as Gen X, but how do we address, whatever the certain scenario is? I'd love to see those and hear those just to make sure that we try to get a chance to address them as we walk through the conversation today. So I'm going to jump in here and get us started. Uh, why do generational differences matter? I think number one at the top of the list is sustainability. Sustaining major gifts are keeping most nonprofits operating. Most of our organizations are not staying above water, keeping the lights on, executing program on either massive six-figure gifts or the 25, 50, $100 a month gifts. We love both of those donor relationships. They both bring a lot of value, but major gifts, repeating, generally this is a 4 or 5 figure level of annual investment these major gifts funders are bringing. That's what a lot of nonprofits are, for lack of a better term, living on. This is mostly baby boomers and Gen X that are giving in this way, right? Um, we know that baby boomers are moving towards fixed income, retirement, change in their ability to give from income versus tapping into assets to give. So there's probably a horizon out there where some of our major gifts funders are not going to be able to continue to be our major gifts funders, which leads to this second point of acquisition and retention. Drawing in new funders, retaining and advancing new funders to a second gift, to multi-time annual gifts, monthly giving, moving them up into major gifts level giving on a repeat year-over-year basis. That acquisition and retention is the way that a nonprofit is going to build to replace their current major gifts funders. That's your horizon for sustainability. Then there's also the dynamic of aligning with motivations. And there's a couple of specific reasons that aligning with motivations matters, especially with the younger generations. We'll unpack those when we get to them. But communicating the value creation, the impact that your organization is delivering is key, absolutely key to getting that next gift, especially with younger generations, but also with older generations as they are changing a little bit in how they give and respond to communications. And last but certainly not least is stewardship, acknowledging, thanking, and appreciating donors for what they are doing to keep our nonprofits and communities across this country healthy and thriving and delivering impact is critical. And how we thank people needs to look a little bit differently from generation to generation. So let's jump in here. Let's look at the data and see what we've got around these generations. Really quick, rough guidelines, and you could go out and Google and find 5 or 6 different versions of these transition years. It's generalized, right? Someone born in 1981 may be much more like a Gen X profile than a millennial, just based on the community they grew up in, whether they were the younger person in their friend group, maybe they skipped college and jumped into the workforce, right? So there's all kinds of variables. Don't overly commit to these transition points in years, but watch for the trends that we're going to note to understand where some of those blurry lines may be between generations. Let's jump in with baby boomers. Baby boomers represent 40 million donors in the market, 49% of total giving. So these are still the most generous in terms of dollar amount of giving that is coming into nonprofits. A 26% volunteer rate, and this number is really fascinating to me. 50% are giving out of obligation. They're giving because they feel like they've got to continue to support that organization that has always been the one that's gotten their money. There's some pros and some cons there. I think there's a lot of organizationally specific dynamic that needs to be considered. If you're in a organization where you've got a large pool of baby boomer funders, if that obligation dries up, you may be in a pinch on funding, right? How do we see these dynamics playing out among baby boomers. They're very legacy focused and institutional trusting. A great example here is a baby boomer. When you ask them who they're going to give to, who comes to mind first for supporting hurricane relief, the American Red Cross is going to be their answer, right? Baby boomers are very, very committed to we'll call it the large institutional fixtures in their minds, maybe not in others, but they know who they go to address a certain cause. They're loyal and they are generous, and they very much value the idea of exclusivity. Those affinity groups, the chairman's club, the president's circle, whatever it might be, these were tried and true development structures when engaging baby boomers, and even to a degree, Gen X, when we get to them. Uh, that's going to taper off as we get younger generations. This personal connection. There's a lot of, oh, I know so and so. This is, I think, that giving out of obligation. I know so and they asked me, and I can't tell them no. Or maybe they gave to the thing that I asked them for, and so now I've got to reciprocate that and give back to their cause. There's a little bit of the quid pro quo philanthropy in here that certainly happens among friends, businesses, and otherwise. Of okay, yeah, we'll back each other's horse in these different areas, but it's a very interesting dynamic that does not continue as we move to younger generations. Tips on engaging baby boomers. How do we want to communicate to them? They like direct mail. That's not going to surprise anybody here. Email, phone, and in person are still highly impactful. They prefer letters, annual reports, e-newsletters. These are the folks that love to have that donor spotlight. Hey, this is Steve and Susie. They've been supporting our cause for decades, and here's what they've helped us do, and here's why our nonprofit is so valued to them. Here's why they love the Humane Society, pictures with their pets and so forth. That sort of very traditional sense fits very well for baby boomers and their traditional approach to giving. One of the greatest opportunities I believe that is out there with baby boomers and even the silent generation that we're not going to talk a lot about today because they very much fit into this baby boomer persona is the great wealth transfer. A lot of nonprofits are aware of this. There's been a lot of news about this over the past years, but this is the wealth, the assets that are held specifically by baby boomers and the silent generation, which are their parents, that is going to be changing hands as baby boomers and the silent generation pass away, and their estates transfer primarily right now to Gen X and Millennials. The most recent estimate that I've seen on this from early 2026, $124 trillion that is represented in those estates. And estimates vary, but 15 is a good average of the percentage of that wealth that is going to transfer to nonprofits. That is huge. That's $18 trillion in a resource that could land in the hands of nonprofits. The average baby boomer today is 71, based on those year blocks that we shared earlier, and they're expected to live to 85 years old. So we're 14 years away on average from any realization of this transfer of wealth, if we just work in aggregate. Here's the reality around estate giving, planned giving, endowment, and so forth. You're probably not going to be in the estate of someone who has not had a long history of engagement with your nonprofit. That means we've got 14 years to build the engagement, to build the legacy, the loyalty, all of those dynamics, and communicate with clarity that you're ready for these type of gifts in your organization, and that you've got a plan that's going to carry on the legacy of these funders, whether that is through their estate, whether that is through the involvement of their children or grandchildren. This is a huge, huge opportunity. The flip side of this coin, there's a great threat that is out there. These donors are giving 49% plus of the major gifts that are flowing into nonprofits right now, which means you've probably got a 14-year or less horizon before your annual sustaining major gifts start to drop off as your donors shift out of giving from income and come to a place they're relying on generosity based on their assets. So while you're working on tapping into this generational wealth, building foundation for endowment and more complex giving, you've also got to be thinking about attracting, acquiring, and retaining younger generations of donors, which brings us to Gen X. And I'm sad to say that Gen X is not the solution as it looks right now to that future wave of major gifts funders. So also 40 million donors, pretty similar in scope to our baby boomer friends, but only 20% of total giving. So almost this or the same number generally of donors, less than half the amount of giving is coming out of Gen X. Interestingly, at 39%, they've got the highest volunteer rate. So a little bit disappointing here as somebody who would be in this Gen X population. Um, we're not showing up with the generosity, but we're giving our time. There's very, very interesting dynamics here. Gen Xers are generally the top supporters of health services, animal welfare, environmental protection. Um, a lot of them, 38%, are donating and 30% are volunteering specifically with religious organizations. But Gen X's kids are starting to head off to college, right? We're not seeing that same type of institutional loyalty where a boomer has always supported University of Phil in your state here because that's where they went and that's where their kids went. And Gen X, similarly, their kids are probably not going to the same college. So there's some of that out there for sure. They're probably not going to follow the tried and true, always give to this organization because we always have. So my hope is that Generation X represents a little bit of a diamond in the rough opportunity to tap into, and I hope that we have a little bit better showing in our generosity as a generation in years ahead. How do we think about traits for Gen X? They're loyal. They're far more pragmatic. They're very results oriented. I was having this conversation in a live group not long ago when we're talking about Gen X and a little bit of back and forth and somebody sharing their thoughts of their assessment of Gen X. And this was a younger generation, probably a Gen Z. They said Gen X are kind of scary. And so maybe it's that latchkey kid dynamic. We're just left alone to our own devices a little bit too much. But that pragmatic, results oriented dynamic is sort of a maybe come across as a little bit cold and disengaged. But there's a great opportunity to plug into that, show personal relevance, show transparency, build trust. And my hope is that there's an opportunity to grow how Gen X is engaged in philanthropy across the market for all types of nonprofits. Preferred channels here, these are not going to be a big surprise. The interesting one to me was LinkedIn as what I would think of as a much more professional centered social media is in fact a way that there's a lot of engagement, and increasingly we're seeing communication from nonprofits going out on LinkedIn. This is a great way for Gen X who are moving into more of those senior management years of their life to wave a banner for the nonprofits that they're involved in, or maybe the board that they're on. Their preferred content is impact reports, testimonials, and they still very much want that formal appeal, right? So very traditional in this sense. Not a great difference from baby boomers here, I would say, other than just not as active and generous in their philanthropy as boomers are. Gen X and boomers collectively represent 81% of large gifts. This data point doesn't come with a, hey, this defines a large gift, but if you were to think about your major gifts funders, they're primarily going to be baby boomers and Gen X in almost any organization. Now we get to shift and talk a little bit about our younger generations of philanthropy. This is where it starts to get very, very interesting to me because we're going to see trends that have started to emerge that continue to change year over year. Gen Z, particular, when we get to them, the data on Gen Z is changing even over 2 to 3 years as they press further into the workforce, and we're seeing more of how they're going to choose to engage. That's true for millennials. Definitely, it continues to be very true for Gen Z as well. Millennials are 33 million donors, 23% of total giving and growing. They leapfrogged Gen X in 2024. So they went from third up to second as the second most generous generation behind baby boomers. This is a really fascinating point. Since 2021-ish, millennials represent the largest portion of the US workforce. For a long time, this was baby boomers, and millennials have jumped forward here. They're moving into what many would assess to be their core career years. Big opportunity earning wise here. The likelihood to have a large family and multiple kids is diminishing as we go into younger generations. That's just a broader comment that's interesting in this. But the way that younger generations, starting with millennials, are thinking differently about giving is changing very much. They're shifting away from institutional loyalty and they're value based, experience driven, and impact focused. So I mentioned with our baby boomers earlier, well, who are we going to call? Who are we going to give to when there's hurricane relief needs? The American Red Cross. Interestingly, millennials are not jumping to the American Red Cross. They're jumping to their smartphone and Google, and they're asking where the most effective pathway is to give to have impact on hurricane relief. I live outside of Atlanta. When Hurricane Helene came through a couple of years ago and just devastated parts of Northeast Georgia, Western North Carolina, and a lot of other parts of the Southeast, I saw locally how so many different groups were jumping up and funds were flowing into these smaller groups. And we've got team members at Convergent who used to work with the American Red Cross, and we're volunteering and helping and providing some support there. And so seeing both sides, it seems to be that this emerges and shows itself when these situations come up. My experience has affirmed this, that younger generations are looking for that quick, let's just find the way to jump in and have the most impact, even if it's loading stuff in a car and driving 3 hours to drop it off, because they want to know that they're being directly impactful and moving a needle. Not have that question of where is this going to go? What's going to really happen with this dollar? Mission fit is huge, very, very big. The emotional storytelling and measurable results, that fits kind of into that. How do I know that I'm giving to the most effective pathway to have impact in this specific area? And then engaging millennials. I don't think any of this is going to surprise anyone. Instagram is at the top of the list. Facebook and email, those are pretty consistent in here, but podcasts comes into the mix. Video storytelling, right? So this is where influencer value or voices come into play and start to shape things. The older generations, that skeptical perspective and that overly, I say overly, but deeply loyal perspective of Gen X and Boomers. Now we get the sort of what is the trend? What is the popular person or the popular voice saying? And it's becoming more and more impactful as those organizations, as these younger generations are hearing those voices. So we go from here to Gen Z, and I presented this at NATO, which is a YMCA conference a couple weeks ago, and overwhelmingly in the room, the most popular question at the front end was, how do we engage Gen Z? Well, Gen Z is very interesting. 30% are already giving. This is the most proactively planning towards philanthropy generation that is out there. There's more representation in this generation of people who know what a DAF is, who understand these different dynamics around philanthropy, and they're emerging right now. And there's the oldest in this generation is 31, right? So they're really just getting out there. I know when I was in my late 20s and early 30s, I was not thinking about philanthropy with an extensive perspective. Despite the fact that I worked in and around nonprofits my whole career at that point, I was still thinking about kind of getting my legs underneath me as a young professional, as a family. Gen Z is so far beyond that in their cause and impact focus. They're very socially cause focused and very data driven. 26% of Gen Z was volunteering at ages 16 to 18. Not even, again, I'm a really bad, jaded Gen Z mindset here. Wasn't even on my mind to think about volunteering at that age. And yet, Gen Z is miles ahead of most of our older generations in terms of how they're thinking about this philanthropy. Um, Gen Z, purpose driven. This is not going to surprise anyone. Justice oriented and identity based. Uh, this dynamic is visible on the news. It's visible on social media when you see how our younger generations are engaging to advance issues they see of great importance in their communities. Their motivators are belonging, activism, and in an interesting way, peer pressure is here on this list. That influencer focus, that don't be left out. You can't not be present supporting the cause. That is, check the box on whatever these other things are, as a great, great amount of influence. Belonging is the one that I would point out. A Gen Z persona out there is going to be looking for the purpose they're committed to, that justice-oriented mindset. But if they don't feel like they belong, that they fit with an organization, they're going to go find another one that impacts the same way. That donor loyalty dynamic is plummeting as we go through generations, and there's much more focus on addressing the cause and feeling like they fit or belong or are welcome in the group of that nonprofit, in the messaging, in the activities, in the opportunities to engage, and so forth. Engaging Gen Z. I've never been on TikTok. I would fail miserably as a Gen Z representative, but TikTok is on the top of the list. Instagram Reels and YouTube Shorts. What's the trend here? Short, rapidly consumable digital content, short form video, right? Influencer challenge. If we think back about 12, 15 years ago, we probably all remember the ice bucket challenge. The interesting dynamic there was the idea was make a donation or pour ice on yourself, and most people chose to pour ice water on themselves. But the visibility of that viral influencer, social media driven dynamic, I think we can see that there's a lot of that has taken root in Gen Z, and to a degree, even in the millennial generation. Interestingly, here, this is just out from the report from Giving USA last week. Gen Z is showing the highest responsiveness to direct mail. 93% of Gen Z in this survey and study reported being motivated to respond with a gift based on direct mail. But they're not replying with that reply envelope. They're replying jumping on their phone or jumping online and giving that gift digitally. Or the second most likely way they're going to respond, this data point absolutely blew my mind. That if Gen Z is not getting on their phone to give, the next thing they're going to do is pick up the phone and call you, and call your nonprofit. I would have thought that the phone call and phone etiquette was not in the repertoire of most Gen Z, just having been on the phone with babysitters in the past who weren't exactly sure what to do when talking on the phone with an adult. But I was totally wrong in that. Pick up the phone and calls, the second most likely response for Gen Z. So, what does this tell us about a traditional communication avenue in direct mail? Number one, don't can your direct mail and go out and start a TikTok, right? We know that direct mail is effective across all generations. What we need to be thinking towards is how do we measure response and target our communication in a way that's going to drive responses that we can follow, that we'll be able to understand the impact, adjust our strategy, and do more of what is delivering results, which we're going to talk more about in a minute. Data informed strategies, right? We talked about looking at all of this information and not just wanting to have some really cool percentages and numbers and, oh, did you know millennials are the largest portion of the workforce? If we can't tap into that to drive fundraising revenue for our nonprofits, it's really just useless, interesting information. 82% of donors across the board say they respond to direct mail, right? So I just said, don't can your direct mail program. It still matters, right? But We need to do direct mail with intentionality. Direct mail may not be, and I say may not because your constituency, your funder audience is unique to your organization. It may not be the avenue for donor acquisition that it was 20 years ago in the education policy nonprofit that I was working with, right? Now, it may be that digital acquisition is a better pathway, but follow-up communication through direct mail is a great way to respond to drive a repeat online gift. Again, self-reported here, donors are twice as likely to respond to direct mail giving online versus that reply envelope that I remember taking stamps and putting them on the reply envelope and just hoping that I was going to get at least that 50 cents back in a gift from the family or individual or business who is going to get that envelope, right? So think a lot about how you're using QR digital codes that you can track responses to different communication pieces. One of the trends that has emerged greatly over the last couple of years is what I like to call responsive giving across all generations. The idea of repeat month to month giving is decreasing, right? So I remember years ago we had this idea that, oh, the younger generations are going to be the set it and forget it subscription philanthropy. They're going to sign up to support the Y or the Humane Society or whatever it is with their X dollars a month, and they're just there. They're not going to go anywhere. Interestingly, that type of recurring automated giving is declining, but what is increasing in its stead is responsive giving, communication from a nonprofit about the impact and the value created through a gift or giving, and then the person receiving that communication looking at the impact and saying, I want to deliver more of that value. And so I'm going to give because I know what it's doing. I know that my gift has paid for fill in the blank impact, and I'm excited about that impact. So I want to make sure more of it happens. This is where we start to take the data points and shape the way we communicate and engage our donors and funders in a manner that catalyzes repeat giving by communicating value, not necessarily an appeal. Interesting note here that we've got to stop and spotlight. 20% of donors noted that they abandon online giving due to digital friction. So what is digital friction? Digital friction is how many taps on your phone or clicks on a web page does it take to get from your response page to completing that gift. Was working, standing up a nonprofit a long time ago, setting up a web page and online giving because we had to have online giving, right? Everybody needed that digital giving avenue. And we had something like 9 or 12 clicks to get to completing an online gift. And we had an outside a web guide who fortunately spotlighted this for us and said, hey, let me show you a couple of examples where you can go to a nonprofit's webpage and within 3 clicks, your gift is done, right? Not to the page where you enter the information, but this digital friction is pushing folks away. We know that there's a lot of safety and stewardship around personal information, financial information that we're all working to navigate with our digital channels. The reCAPTCHA, prove you're not a robot dynamic that I think everybody gets frustrated with, clicking the pictures. Interestingly, security, digital security is one of the reasons older generations note as friction for online giving. So work with your communications team, your IT team, your web management firm, if you're outsourcing that, create smooth, simple, and easy to execute safe avenues for digital giving where you're going to be missing out on giving. Another great dynamic here we've got to think about when we're in an annual campaign, a year-end campaign, anything of that type. Once a funder has responded to a campaign appeal and made a gift, shift them off into a separate communication track. The digital communication tools we have today are so much more responsive and robust than what we had in place 5 years ago, much less 15 or 20 years ago, where you might have to actually take names out of different lists of direct mail follow-up. Today, once somebody's made that gift, shift them into an acknowledgement and stewardship track, not repeat appeal. Instead of, we still need your gift, it's a thank you for your gift. Here's what we've accomplished. You and others have helped us make 60% of our goal. Here's the impact we've achieved already. Obviously, slicing these into separate communications. And maybe even, would you invite others to join you in giving towards this impact versus the rest of that uncommitted, non-given appeal track of communication? So this could be year end, again, annual appeal, whatever it may be. Think about communicating progress and impact as a catalyst to drive gifts. And then once that gift is secured, immediately moving to acknowledging and stewarding that relationship. All right, so we've talked about a lot of data points here. Um, what do we do? What do we not do? Number one, I think we need to think about what not to do. It's very easy with data points that are linked to significant implications in fundraising results to jump to conclusions. The number one thing I would say is don't panic. None of these dynamics are going to be a switch, flip, overnight change in the market. They're emerging, they're taking time. As I already said, Gen Z is looking different every 12 to 18 months with different reports coming out, even from the same sources. So we don't need to panic about where we're at. We don't need to make sweeping changes. Don't go out there and can your direct mail and just replace it with a TikTok, as I said before. You might do well to create some short form digital content, videos specifically, if you've got a great opportunity to engage a younger generation audience. But that younger generation, based on the data, is not going to be providing your sustaining major gifts in the very near future. We want them to get to that place 5, 8, 10, 12 years from now, but that's a long pathway. We've got to build towards that while we're cultivating older generations, keeping them engaged, those traditional funders, in hopes of also being able to tap into some asset-based giving long term. And then I would say here, don't miss the trees for the forest, right? Don't forget, every individual donor is still an individual donor. Don't lump everyone together into millennial or Gen X. I'm right in that in between of those two generations. I don't fit the millennial mold. I much more fit the Gen Z mold. But if someone just, or sorry, Gen Z, the millennial mold, someone just looked at my birth year on an arbitrary line on a calendar and they lumped me into, okay, we got to communicate through Instagram, they would miss me, right? So don't just jump to conclusions and lump everybody into these boxes. And I would say too, don't chase the shiny things. So what do we mean by this? 124 trillion dollars in great wealth transfer. Uh, I don't want to downplay the potential there, but for most nonprofits right now, that's a shiny thing if you don't already have very solid plan giving and endowment communications and processes in place with your baby boomer and silent generation donors. You don't want to disregard the opportunity that represents for funding and, I mean, really potentially transformational funding, but you also can't just chase that because what you might end up with is one or two great estate gifts and no sustaining major gifts, and your organization is underwater before you get to, sad to say, the funeral that might trigger that estate gift. None of us want to be in that place. That's not good for our organizations. That's not good for our development processes. So how do we avoid these not to dos? Adapt development strategies, right? Modify the things you're doing in a manner that you can learn from. I know we've got a lot of YMCAs on the call today. YMCAs are my favorite audience for this because more than any other nonprofit that I've seen, most YMCAs, due to the membership process, have birthdays for almost all of their members and donors. So you get a much clearer starting point on how to potentially segment, right? Otherwise, there might be a lot of guesswork that goes on. Caveat there, if you're a Boys and Girls Club or a humane society or an alumni association, a theater, right? Don't be afraid to poll your donors and funders and ask them their birthday. Send them a card. Hey, when you're at the next show, hey, here's a free a cocktail or popcorn. When you're at the next play, whatever it might be, create some ways to celebrate their birthday, but you've got to know their birthday first, right? So don't be afraid to poll and get that information to inform some of this. Some wealth screening tools can also share with you birthday and ages. That's not always perfectly trustworthy. I did this with a client recently, and we had a family or an individual on their wealth screen list, and it said they were 360 years old, which I'm certain is not accurate. So uh, don't trust those outside sources as gospel, absolute fact, but consider using outside sources to get some of this information if you need to. Um, so that's assessing your donors and members. Determine the trends that are out there, right? Understand what you've seen from your giving history and what potential trends could be realized by applying some of the data points we've seen to growth opportunities for your organization. If you've got very poor donor acquisition in younger generations, maybe you do want to do a social media or short form video campaign to see if you can drive some donor acquisition and new gifts or repeat gifts. But do that in a format that you can test to see the engagement and learn from. Implement cross channel communications. I will tell you, this is easier than ever before because you can go into most any AI model and tell it about your organization, tell it about your campaign timeline, and say, we want to adapt a communication plan to leverage print media, email media, social media posts, short form video. Can you provide recommendations on a timeline? And it will give you a directionally correct outline that you can build on. So think about the messaging on your year-end campaign, how it's going to flow through email, how it's going to flow through print media, how you might do social media and other digital. And most importantly here, think about engaging families cross-generationally. If you've got a space where you can see where different generations of a family are engaged in your work, think about building on that legacy dynamic. Think about how you would communicate to the baby boomer in the family about the generational impact that your organization is having on their family and the way that they can sustain that legacy through a planned gift in the future. And then to the Gen X donor in that family, here's the way we're cultivating trust and delivering value around these certain programs that we've seen you've had a part of. And then there's the, hey, we need a capital project for this program that's going to support your kids. Well, now you just tapped into the parents and the grandparents because they may care about that. So where you've got this opportunity, think about cross-generational engagement. This is going to help you acquire new donors, build major gifts funders, and set the stage for the best success in capital, endowment, and other complex gifts as well. Tapping into the wealth transfer, I mentioned a couple of these already, but estate gifts are almost never, I would say rarely because I've seen some of the exceptions to the rule, but almost never a first major gift. I was in a session at a conference several weeks ago, and I heard it noted that the average estate gift is between 10 and 100 times a donor's average annual major gift. So think about the exponential impact of that. Building engagement, focusing on legacy and long-term impact for the organization is what you need to be working on to be ready to tap into this wealth transfer. And again, you'll see this in many places, generational value creation. Not just what creates value to that generational perspective, but for the legacy generations that they are motivated to care for and equip with their philanthropy. Ensuring sustainability, referenced several of these points earlier on. Probably your next best wave of major gifts funders are millennials. Think about targeting, segmenting, and acquiring donors in that pool of millennials with a very focused strategy to move them into major gifts over the next 5 to 8 years. You said 5 to 8 years, gosh, that's such a long time. You're probably not with the more data-driven, show me the best way and show me the results mindset. You're probably not going to jump straight into major gifts level with Millennial and Gen Z. There certainly will be exceptions, but you're going to want to cultivate, build trust, show impact, show belonging, right? We used that word before. You're going to want them to feel connected, engaged, and trusted in philanthropy partnership with you before you're going to get to that major gift level. So watch for that transition point. What do I mean by transition point? Is there a spot based on demographics and generations that you can see on the horizon where some of your major gifts funders are moving out of income-based giving towards more of a fixed income, which is code word for retirement, right? And may have to change some of their giving. I would say if you've got core year over year over year committed major gifts funders that are moving this direction, obviously relationship is key in this, but don't be afraid to start this conversation. Have discussions with them about what they've done, the impact they've had in your organization, and how committed you are to making sure that what they've done is well stewarded into the future, and invite them to help share perspective on how you may be able to bring some future major gifts funders and sustaining wave of funding for the future into the mix. For some of them, this is that cross-generational engagement. It may be going to the patriarch and matriarch of the family and saying, hey, would your kids or grandkids be interested in a board role? Do you think they would like to play a role the way that you have, carrying on your legacy for our work that we're doing in the community? Consistency and engagement, right? I mentioned before, preference for recurring giving is going down. Communicating impact with frequency across different communication channels is going to be critical to keep gifts coming in the doors. That automated, it's coming in, tagging the credit card or the ACH on the 12th of every month is just not going to be as persistent. What's missing from the data? These are two of my favorite points to point out. Gen Z trends are changing. 2 years from now, I think we're going to see different dynamics around Gen Z than the data shows today. So we just got to expect there's going to be a little bit of a faster pace moving target there. And what is not at all represented when we look at grouping by generations, the year you're born in, is the exponentially growing dynamic of women and minority-driven philanthropy. It used to be that most of the time when we were talking major gifts funders and capital campaigns or anything else, we were talking with middle-aged and older white males. That is increasingly not the case. Increasingly, both in corporate leadership, philanthropic, institutional foundation leadership, and family-driven giving, women and minorities are much more proactive in philanthropy and decision-making. Think about the prospect of creating a women's giving circle for your organization. Think about looking at the diversity of the audience, the constituency that you're serving. How does your funding mix, your donor mix, and your leadership and staff representation reflect the diversity of that population? We mentioned again, belonging with younger generations, that justice orientation, cause issue focused giving. These female and minority driven philanthropic decisions, if they don't see that they fit with the belonging and the worldview and the perspective of a nonprofit, they're going to find the nonprofit that they do fit with. So this is a very important dynamic to think about that's outside of the data of just year to year, what age are you? Implementation tactics. If you're sitting out there thinking, okay, what do we do? How do we start to adapt this? What's a starting point? We love the development audit. Development audit, which in a couple of months, we're going to be doing a webinar, a shameless plug on this, on development audits, and its audit is not a four-letter word. An audit can help you identify segments in your donor base, identify gaps, identify all kinds of opportunities, and assess your organizational capacity from communications, from staffing to volunteer engagement to inform some tests that you can implement, some communications and fundraising changes to try to address some of these gaps, and then run the OODA loop. I'll explain what that is in just a second. Another great opportunity here, if you've got a major funding initiative on the horizon, again, second webinar that we'll be doing in June next month is on campaign planning and structure in this summer fundraising strategy series that we've got going on. and that is the comprehensive campaign as an alternative to a single channel campaign. So, what's a single channel campaign or a siloed campaign? The annual campaign, a standalone capital campaign, an endowment centric campaign. The comprehensive campaign is just taking those multiple different funding avenues, blending them in together, and engaging donors based on their capacity, their affinity, and naturally their generational stage to engage them in overall advancement and fundraising avenues for a nonprofit. So that's a great way to address major gifts and complex gift opportunities while also building in maybe a little bit of acquisition, maybe a little bit of major gifts advancement from some of those younger generations. Something that we've got to make sure we don't forget with all the conversation about digital, print, all of those dynamics, generationally agnostic here. The number one factor prompting online giving is being asked in person. Don't ever forget, don't ever forego the value of sitting down with a donor and making an ask for their next gift, or with a prospect and making a clear ask for a first gift, helping them know their gift matters. Their involvement is critical. It's not a law of averages. 2,000 people got this mailer and oh, maybe I'll respond and do something. It's a we need you. We need your partnership, your investment to deliver the results that are delivering value in our community. All right, so last two pieces here, and we'll jump into any questions. I mentioned the OODA loop. The OODA loop, I think this is maybe a military term. I heard it years ago and it just stuck with me. But it is observe, orient, decide, and act. And just run through that loop over and over. Know where you're starting. Review data on your funders and trends. This is where an audit is very helpful, or any type of analytical review of your donor base and giving trends. Orient, determine the direction, the areas of opportunity. What do you want to focus on? Or what could you focus on? And what could the results be? How will we track the data? Decide, choose the things you're going to focus on. Choose simple strategies. Don't boil the ocean. Say, hey, we want to see if we can drive acquisition of younger funders through video engagement in this year's annual campaign. Great. Set up the plan, set up the measurable results, do it in the act box there. Look at the responses, adjust the plan, observe from those, and then go right back into this process. From a communication standpoint, segment your audiences, tailor messages by channel, content, and so forth based on different demographics. Clarify. Clarity beats cleverness. I love that phrase. You don't just want to be witty. You want to have a good, clear message that's focused on impact. Simplify things. We talked about friction. And then appreciate. Always be thanking our funders. So those two key takeaways. We're going to send this deck out to all the participants afterwards as well. But I would love to see if there are any questions and answer any questions that you all have in the chat here or in the Q&A as we move on. Yeah, okay, great question. Why do you think it is that Gen Z are responding to direct mail? I have no idea. The data does not give any of those indicators. My conjecture on this point is that for so long, and I'm guilty of this, what's in the mailbox is just disregarded and almost immediately just dropped in the trash can on the way in the house. I think there is this something special dynamic with Gen Z of, oh, I got mail. I got print mail. It's not another email. It's, somebody sent me something. So I think that's a factor. That's just a guess. The data that I've seen does not unpack anything beyond that, but it surprised me and intrigued me, the continued efficacy of direct mail. I would have thought that would be something we would be canning by this point or not far in the future, but it doesn't look that way. All right, endowment and planned giving. What do we need to do as a nonprofit to be ready to take advantage of planned giving and the wealth transfer? The simplest thing that you can do is prepare a very simple document that has the full legal name of your organization, your EIN, your Federal Employee Identification Number, and any other specific dynamics that maybe your legal counsel, or if you've got an endowment entity formed, you would want to use that legal name and EIN and just make it available, right? Put it on your webpage, on everything you have that goes out there. Have a box that can be checked. I'd like to learn more about non-traditional giving of assets, stock, or otherwise. Check the box, and then you follow up with them. I will tell you from our conversations, and anytime we're doing a feasibility study, an advancement audit, engaging a funders, a nonprofit's funders, we're asking them if they've thought about this. Uh, it's surprising to me how often we learn of planned gifts a donor has in place that our clients don't know about because we just ask in a feasibility interview. Have you ever considered planned giving for the Y or the theater or the museum? Oh yeah, well I've got fill in the blank organization in my estate already. We've loved this organization for decades, whatever it is. So what do you take away from that? You take away from that that the people who are in the place to make these type of complex giving decisions are already thinking about what they're going to do to have impact with their estates. They don't want it going to taxes. They don't want it going to whatever the other things may be, or maybe they just want to make sure that their philanthropic legacy carries on. Another great resource there around the planned giving and endowment space. If you don't have expertise on your board or within your organization, plug in with a local community foundation. They're one of our favorite resources to point nonprofits to be able to set up a nonprofit fund. They can receive, they can manage gifts. Most community foundations are going to have a professional advisors network that's going to provide perspective on exactly how to manage those complex gifts. All right, we got one more. How will the record inflation we have experienced in the last few years affect philanthropic behavior for these generations? Man, that is a great question. We're seeing some early indicators of that. I don't think this is a definitive answer, but out of the Giving USA report that came out end of April, and forgive me, Giving USA, I don't remember the name of the report, but it's on their webpage. They talked about economic confidence and concern among donors. This is fascinating to me. Economic concerns of economic instability are down among individuals, and yet plans to give more are down among individuals. The place that that information deviates is that funders who are giving to and engaged in religious groups have an increased level of concern over the economy, as well as an increased level of planning for additional philanthropy. So I'll try to say that again because I think I kind of answered the question in a confusing way. If we take individuals and we segment them into two groups, those who are religiously motivated and engaged in their giving and those who are not, those who are religiously motivated are more concerned about the economy and don't have a positive outlook, but they're also planning to give more. But those who are not religiously engaged or motivated have very little concern about the economy, but they're interestingly not planning to give more. I don't know if that's an inflation dynamic. I'm really not sure about that. There wasn't a lot of detail there. I would say that the prospect of inflation to hurt individual giving at the annual and kind of major to mid-major level is probably one that we should be very aware of and be monitoring. When we start to talk about older generations and asset-based giving, in a sense, inflation causes some assets to grow in value. Real estate's a great example of that. Appreciated stocks. So I think this is one of those that's going to vary depending on the funding audience, but it's a great question and a thing that I'm hopeful that we'll get more strong data and clarity on in the future. All right, we're here at the end of our hour. Thank you so much for joining. As I mentioned, you can go online and see these other webinars, but June 16th, we're going to be talking about campaign planning and strategy. And then in July, I believe the date's going to be the 22nd, we're going to be talking about audits and the value of assessing your development scenario. Really grateful to have the opportunity to share this information. We will be sharing access to the recording and the slide deck afterwards. We'll get those all emailed out to you here shortly. Thanks so much for joining us today.